President Trump is warning Iran the United States will intervene if the Islamic Republic begins killing protesters.
If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
One of the Middle East's most closed, harshest, and most ruthless regimes is facing the greatest test in its history. But this time, the enemy is not beyond the border. This time, the regime has turned its guns on its own women. Led by women, protests that began on December 28, 2025, spread to approximately 70 cities across the country within a week and turned into an anti-regime movement. These protests began with widespread discontent, triggered by the economic crisis, but quickly evolved into demands for human rights and freedom. Women, in particular, are at the forefront of this uprising, throwing off their headscarves and defying the regime's oppressive policies. In more than 70 cities across Iran, across a vast geography stretching from the shores of the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, millions of people are shouting a single truth. The empire of fear is collapsing. Khamenei's threats of "we will not forgive" are lost amid the chants of "woman, life, freedom" echoing in the streets. Images from the streets reveal the gravity of the situation. In Tehran's Narmak district, at the heart of the regime, thousands are marching chanting, "No to the Islamic Republic." The most striking detail among these crowds is their headscarves. Tehran is rocked by a massive wave of anger. This is not one of the protests we know. It is the final cry of millions who are fed up with breadlines, power cuts, and, most importantly, the restrictive ideological straitjacket imposed upon them. The regime controls everything from women's clothing to their movements, thereby eliminating individual freedoms. Women throwing off their headscarves during protests are presenting a manifesto against these restrictions. Women tearing off their headscarves is not just a symbolic act, but an expression of rebellion against years of accumulated pressure and restrictions. Those coverings, which the regime has for years coded as honor and the foundation of the state, and made compulsory, are now being waved like flags in the hands of women and then set on fire. Women are bravely resisting the regime's morality police. Khamenei's labeling of the protesters as provocateurs and telling them they would not be forgiven has motivated the women even more. Despite Khamenei's declaration of all-out war, women are breaking their silence and removing their headscarves in the streets. This defiance is a challenge to the regime's threats and highlights the critical role of women in Iranian society. It is about rejecting 45 years of theocratic constitution in the streets. Throughout history, movements led by women have brought about great change, and a similar scenario is unfolding in Iran. Mothers, wives, and sisters are taking to the streets to protect their families and their future, shaking the foundations of the regime. The hardships endured by Iranian women go beyond the headscarf requirement. The restrictions they face in education, work, and social life are suffocating. The regime views women as second-class citizens, and this manifests as discrimination in daily life. Women are seen as the cornerstones of Iranian society. If they rise up, regimes fall. Look, there is a very striking example. A mother who lost her son to the bullets of the regime's forces. Normally, she would be expected to mourn and shut herself away at home. But what is she doing? She is going out into the streets and dancing in the middle of the crowd. This is not a dance of joy. It is the most artistic, tragic, and powerful way of saying, "You took my son, but you cannot take my spirit." This image is a picture of the Iranian regime's inevitable defeat. Because you can surround cities with tanks, you can cut off the internet, which is currently being done on a large scale in Iran, but you cannot stop a mother's anger with any weapon. As the world watches these images, the Tehran administration is also experiencing a major crisis within itself. President Masoud Pezeshkian's calls for dialogue contradict Khamenei's order to crush. Is there a rift at the top of the state, or is this just a good cop, bad cop game? Analysts point out that the regime's economic resources are depleted. Tehran, which for years has channeled oil revenues to the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon, is now unable to pay its own official salaries. In the eyes of the people, the equation is very simple. While we are starving here, missiles are being bought in Lebanon with our money. This awareness has turned into nationalist anger. Protesters chanting slogans in favor of Reza Pahlavi symbolizes a total rejection of the current system rather than a longing for monarchy. People are at the point of saying, whatever happens, just let them go. Reza Pahlavi's enthusiastic welcome in Egypt and the chanting of his name by protesters in Iran show how vivid the public's memory of alternatives to the regime is. Women are raising their children amid economic hardship while also struggling against the regime's religious oppression. The inadequacy of the minimum wage limits access to food and healthcare, driving mothers to revolt. Their resistance represents families' struggle for survival. The headscarf is a symbol of oppression for women. Throwing it away is a declaration of individual freedom. Mothers dancing in protests are turning their grief into resistance and surprising the regime. This cultural expression shows the world the power of Iranian women. Footage from the city of Kharson shows women shouting, "Death to the dictator!" in front of posters of Khamenei, proof that the regime's greatest fear has come true. So, how is the regime responding to this situation? In his harsh speech today, Khamenei labeled the protesters instigators and agents. He announced that they would show them no mercy and declared an all-out war. This language sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's the classic external forces rhetoric that every authoritarian leader resorts to when cornered. But this time, there's something Khamenei hasn't accounted for. The crowd he faces no longer fears his threats, because people are already economically dead. Physical death doesn't seem more frightening than slowly dying of hunger. The regime's stick is not enough to silence the rumbling of an empty stomach. The critical question we must ask here is, can the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, stop this wave? Field reports whisper that the security forces are also tired and reluctant. Yes, the besieged militias are attacking ruthlessly, clashing with protesters in cities like Shar-e-Ray and Mervdast. But this violence is having the effect of pouring gasoline on the fire rather than suppressing the uprising. People are fighting a war for freedom in the streets against the regime's forces. The regime's response is fueling anger. People are no longer fleeing, they are fighting back. The role of women in this resistance in particular signals an irreversible change in Iranian sociology. When women take to the streets in a society, the legitimacy of that movement becomes indisputable. Iranian women are fighting not only for their own freedom, but also for their fathers, husbands, and sons. They are the system's biggest victims. It's hard for them to get jobs, they need permission to travel, their clothing is a state matter. And now, they are breaking this stranglehold. What is happening in Iran right now is very different from the 2009 Green Movement or the 2022 Mahsa Amini protests. It signals a much more dangerous and much more fundamental rupture. Because this time, it's not just angry students on the ground. This time, there are millions of women on the ground who have nothing left to lose, whose refrigerators are empty, whose futures have been stolen, and whose dignity has been violated. And history shows us very clearly, when mothers and women start marching at the forefront, no dictator can stay in power for long. So, what was the spark that turned 70 cities into a burning inferno within a week? Actually, it all started with a number: $110. In Iran right now, the monthly minimum wage that a worker, a father, or a woman trying to support her family receives is only $110. But the tragedy of this figure hits you like a slap in the face when you go to the market. Yes, the reality on the street is much more brutal. We are talking about a country where inflation has exceeded 50% and food prices change hourly. So much so that as of January 4th, $1 reached a value of 1.45 million Iranian Rials on the black market. This value is the highest in history and is leading to an increase in black market activity. Women are forced to resort to the black market to meet their basic needs, which puts them at even greater risk. Economic pressure is one of the main reasons triggering women's uprising. This is not the devaluation of a currency. This is the shredding of a nation's labor, savings, and dignity. People go out into the streets with millions of rials in their pockets and return home with only a few pieces of bread. This economic devastation has transcended ideological boundaries and brought the fire in the kitchen to the streets. Iranian women were forced to choose between their children's hunger and the regime's oppression, and they chose rebellion without hesitation. The situation in Iran is not just an internal matter. It has the potential to shape global energy markets and the balance of power in the Middle East. China was keeping its economy afloat by buying discounted oil from Iran. Russia was striking Ukraine with Iranian drones. If Tehran falls, or is dragged into a prolonged civil war, Moscow and Beijing's logistical lifelines will also be cut. That is why this uprising is worrying not only the streets of Tehran, but also the Kremlin and Beijing. But let's return to the streets, to the determination in those women's eyes. Iranian women were struggling to access food sold at exorbitant prices on the black market, while also dealing with harassment from the morality police. But that threshold of fear has now been crossed. Simultaneous protests in 70 cities are a sign of organized anger. Although the regime is trying to cut off the internet to isolate the country from the world, these videos, these cries, are finding a way to reach us. Right now, bells are ringing in Tehran, very loudly. This sound is not the sound of the Revolutionary Guard's boots. This sound is the footsteps of women who are willing to die for their freedom. This quest for freedom, combined with economic misery, has plunged the Islamic Republic of Iran into the greatest existential crisis in its history. The mullahs may be able to suppress it with guns today, and they may arrest thousands tomorrow. But in a country where a dollar is worth 1.5 million rials, where a mother cannot afford milk for her child, and where women have made their hair their flag, the days of that regime are numbered. History has repeatedly proven that there is no greater army than a hungry and angry people, especially women who have risen up for their honor. Is Tehran falling, or is a greater bloodbath beginning? The coming hours will tell, but one thing is certain: the genie is out of the bottle in Iran, and it will never go back in. Ultimately, this uprising in Iran is being shaped by the power of women. The desire for freedom will bring down the regime. As mothers and women rise up, the fall of Tehran is inevitable. So what do you think? Can the brave resistance of Iranian women change the fate of the Middle East? Or will the regime, as always, drown this uprising in blood? I'm Charlie from the MrWARLOG team. Thank you for watching. I look forward to your thoughts in the comments. We will continue to witness these historic moments, so stay tuned.